Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today I'm joined by Bad Vibes Storytelling. Please be sure to subscribe to his channel as soon as the video is over. I will leave a link to his channel in the description box below. I will answer all of your questions that you guys all commented to me in the next video when I am not rushed for time. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Number 1. My name is Craig and I'm 15 years old. I love to play ice hockey and I play on a team. After practice, I always stay behind to work on my shooting. I'm the only one who stays behind while the rest of the team heads home. But I like it that way. I prefer to have the ice to myself. I was doing my thing after practice like usual when I heard some skates on the ice. I turned around to see someone standing at the other end of the ice rink. He was tall, wearing an old hockey goalie mask. He had long black hair and an old Anaheim Ducks jersey on. For a second I thought it was one of my teammates or coaches playing a prank on me. He was just standing there staring at me. I said, "Who's that?" "Scotty, is that you?" No answer. He then slowly passed a puck towards me, and it slowly stopped right in front of me. He then tapped his stick on the ice like when you call for a pass. I didn't do anything, only stare uncomfortably and confused at this strange guy. He tapped his stick on the ice once more, this time more aggressive. I nervously then passed the puck back to him. He then passed it back to me. I wanted to leave the rink because this guy was creeping me out, and I didn't know who he was. He certainly wasn't a teammate or anyone I knew. But the exit was on the other side of the rink, right where the creepy guy was. He tapped his stick once again, still aggressively, so I passed the puck back to him and he passed it back to me. I spoke out saying, I think I'm going to call it a night. When I said this, he turned around, and I thought he was going to leave. But unfortunately, he never left. But he walked over to the door to close the door to the ice rink. At this point, I was extremely scared. He then skated fast, really fast towards me. I thought he was about to attack me, but he stopped abruptly right in front of me. Now staring into my eyes, he looked angry. I couldn't say or do anything. I was honestly frightened for my life at this point. This man was much bigger than me and could easily overpower me. He then slid aside, sort of saying that I can go past. I then quickly skated to the other end of the rink and exited through the door. I turned around to see what the strange man was doing. He was just standing there watching me. I walked off towards the changing rooms when I heard a tapping coming from the rink. I don't know who that man was or what he was doing. It was obvious he wasn't all there in the head. This took place about a month and a half ago, and I haven't seen the guy since. I still stay behind after practice, but I'm always paranoid I'm going to hear that tapping on the ice. Story number 2. When I was about 13, I was playing football with 3 of my friends. 2 of them were 13 and 1 of them was 11. The youngest one was a friend's younger brother. We were on the field playing football, having a good time, and at one point the ball got booted over the fence into a garden. We were having a little argument over who should go over and get it. Just as we were discussing it, a man walked onto the field with a football of his own. He said, "Hey boys, you can play with my ball if you'd like." The man didn't look right at all. I couldn't see any children with him, or anyone around the park for that matter. So it was clear he was there on his own. He was wearing a football jersey that was too tight for him, and shorts were way too short. My friends and I awkwardly looked at each other, confused. Then one of my friends said, "Okay, we will play with your ball." Unexpectedly, the man said, "Great, so I can play with you." I'm not sure about the rest of my friends, but I thought this was very odd. Why was a 30-year-old wanting to play with 4 young boys who were complete strangers? We were a bit confused, but still we were young and just wanted to play football, so we agreed and let him play. We each introduced ourselves to him, but when we said our names, he gave each of us a hug, kind of like you do with your friends. Only we weren't friends, and the hugs went on for a few seconds longer than they needed to be. The man said his name was Evan. We started to play football and kick the ball around. During our playtime, every time the man tried to tackle, he was always overly physical with us. He would always use his hands to grab us when we were too close to him. He did things that were completely unnecessary. I said, "I think I'm going to head home. I'm pretty tired." Two of my friends agreed. Whether or not they had enough of this weirdo, I don't know. But the 11-year-old kept saying he wanted to stay and play football, as if there wasn't enough red flags going on. The strange man then said, "Well, he can come to my house and play football. I'll drop him off later." My friend, who is the brother of the young boy, said, "No, he has to come home with us." The man then put his hand on the back of the 11-year-old boy and said it's no problem. He can have fun at my house and I will give him back later. I grabbed the young boy's hand and walked him out of the field. The man just stayed on the field looking at us as we walked away. I won't ever forget his face. The man went from smiling and happy to the most bitter, crazed psycho I had ever seen. It was quite clear that that man had only one thing in mind. Story number 3. It was a nice sunny day outside, and me and a bunch of my friends were playing baseball in the nearby park in our neighborhood. We were about 15 or 16 years old at the time. During the game, I went to get a sip of water from my bag when I noticed a hooded man sat on a bench watching us. At first, this wasn't unusual, but I kept my eye on him the whole time we were playing, and I noticed he never left the bench, never met with anyone, and never took his eyes off of us. I thought, yeah, it was weird, but I tried to just enjoy playing baseball with my friends. At some point during the game, I was out fielding and happened to notice the man had gone from the bench. I thought to myself, okay, see, I knew it was nothing. The ball got hit and went over near some bushes next to where the hooded guy was sitting. I was closest, so I ran over around the bushes to get the baseball. I couldn't find it. I looked around while my friends were yelling at me to hurry up. Suddenly, I noticed a man standing, hiding behind a tree. It was a guy that was on the bench from earlier. He was looking at me with a menacing expression on his face. He then pulled something out of his pocket and said, "Looking for this?" It was a baseball. I said, "Oh, yeah, thanks for finding our ball." I put my hands up gesturing for him to throw me the ball. He put the ball back in his pocket and said, "Come here and take it from me." I hesitated, standing there watching him with nervous confusion. I asked him, "Can't you just throw it to me?" He laughed and said, "Nah, that would be too easy." I didn't know what he meant by that, and I just knew it was nothing good. He then dropped the ball on the ground, about a yard away from himself. There you go. I took one step forward and saw he had one hand in his pocket, and just as I took a step forward towards him, his hand had tightened whatever it was that he was holding. I didn't want to find out what was in his pocket, so I just said, "Keep it." I went back to my friends and said I couldn't find it. It was no big deal, as we always had 4 or 5 extra baseballs with us. The rest of the day, I enjoyed playing with my friends, even though I was pretty distracted. I managed to forget about the guy for the rest of the day. Later that night around 9 p.m., I was playing Xbox Live and eating Doritos when my mom asked me to take out the trash. As I went outside to my backyard to throw the garbage away, I heard footsteps on the other side of my fence, along with a glass bottle being kicked around. I said, "Hello? Who's there?" Of course, I didn't get a response. I turned around and started walking back inside the house when I heard a slight thud behind me. I turned around to see the baseball from earlier rolling towards me in the grass.
This happened in the early 2000s, and I was around 12 years old. My dad passed away 2 years before, leaving my mom, sister, and myself. To help cope with my father's passing, my mom took me to an animal shelter to pick out a dog, since having a large dog is something I always wanted. In one of the cages was a small shepherd husky, huddled up in the corner, that right away I fell in love with. When this incident happened, he was 1 year old, 90 pounds. My mom was working nights, and my older sister was taking advantage that my mom wasn't home, and would constantly leave me alone. I didn't mind though, because then she couldn't boss me around. Since when she was home, she would try being mom and telling me what to do and when to go to bed. We lived in a small middle-class suburb with low crime rate, and I wasn't scared to be home alone. So this night, I was sitting home in the living room playing a video game, and I had gotten up to go to the kitchen to grab a drink. In the kitchen, I had a clear view through the back door and could see that the garage was open. I headed out to close it. My dog was sleeping in the basement, since he liked to lay on the cold floor during the summer months, and at the time I didn't think of taking him out with me. I step out the door and make it about 5 feet, when I noticed in the darkness a crouched shadow moving in the garage. I froze, trying to get my eyes to adjust to make out what the shadow was. It finally hit me when I saw the figure stand up and turn towards me. I was terrified and felt like I had been glued to the spot. I knew this person could see me since the back porch light was on and shining above me. At that moment, the figure started running towards me. I was too scared to move and let out more of a yelp than a scream. But that was all it took for my dog to hear, and the next thing I hear is him behind me, snarling and growling. I could make out it was a man, but no features, as he was now frozen, seeing the 90-pound beast behind me. He turned and ran for the back fence with my dog right behind him. The guy made it to the fence, and since it was only 4 feet, he hopped right over it before my dog got to him. After he got away, my dog came running back to me, and we went inside where I barricaded the doors. I don't know why I didn't call the cops, and I never told my mom or sister what happened. One thing that still bothers me was he had to know that I was inside, since the lights were on and the blinds were open. So why did he risk hitting a house where he knew someone was clearly home? The next morning, after my mom was home, I went outside and finally closed the garage, and noticed that he had been going through my dad's toolbox. I locked the garage and never told anyone what happened. I walked my dog to McDonald's and got him a hamburger and an ice cream cone for being my hero. It was early July. I had just begun my senior year of college, but was home for the summer. While at home, I met Lisa on Tinder. Lisa lived in the same town as my college and invited me to come stay with her for the weekend. I happily obliged because that booty. The weekend with Lisa went great. We started dating. I returned a couple weeks later. It's now late July or early August 2012. My housing for the upcoming year was going to be in our fraternity housing, off campus. We had a main house, the big house, and a smaller house in the backyard, the little house. I needed to clean up the little house as I was going to move into it, since it was left pretty filthy by the previous tenants. Lisa offered to help, so we spent most of our time in there. The little house was stockpiled with furniture that people had left for the summer instead of taking home. There were probably 6 or 7 couches stuffed into a teeny living room, so you literally had to hop from one to another to navigate the room, which we made a game of it, and made great use of them during the weekend. Sorry, bros. To give you an idea of the layout, the little house was a ranch-style brick home with 3 adjacent bedrooms at the back of the house, and a kitchen and living room at the front. The front door entered directly into the living room. The side door, if entering the home, was off to the right, on the far side of the kitchen. In the living room was one large 6x8 glass window covered with blackout curtains at the front of the house. Okay, so here's the story. It's late, probably around 11 p.m. Lisa and I were tuckered out, and we cuddled up on one of the couches to watch the London Olympics. She dozed off, head on my chest, and I'm left there happily pinned down. Suddenly, the front doorknob starts to shake, I'm caught off guard because it's summer in an empty college town and we weren't expecting anyone. It stops for a moment, then the doorknob shakes more violently this time. Thankfully, it's locked. As I prepare to slide out from under Lisa to investigate, 3 loud bangs against the door as if someone was trying to kick it open. Their attempt failed. I'm partially relieved, but I'm still aware that there are 2 doors that they could enter. Lisa is awake now, delirious and frantic. What's going on? What was that? I hushed her and told her to get up and go to the back of the house, and to go into the bedroom and lock the door until I personally came to get her. She refused, but I demanded. She scurried across the couches and locked herself in the back room. I ran to the far side of the kitchen to make sure the side door was locked. It is. Okay, we're alright for now. Thinking to myself, weapon, what can I use? Shit, I wish I had a gun. Maybe the brothers left something. Shotgun would be ideal. I see a hunting bow with a few arrows. No, that's too cumbersome. Keep looking. Golf club. 6-iron. Perfect. Everything is silent, aside from the pounding heartbeat and the faint sound of Lisa calling the cops from the back room. I'm standing in the kitchen and have a view of the front door and the side door while clutching the golf club, when suddenly the side door knob starts shaking and there's a couple of bangs at the door. Lisa screams from the back of the house and I yell at the intruder. We're in here. We called the cops. They'll be here any second. Leave us alone. The banging stops. It's silent. Dead silent. We wait for the cops to come. Lisa and I are in the living room, full of couches. 2 full hours pass. It's now something like 2:30, and still no signs of the cops. I'm both exhausted from the adrenaline crash, and angry that the cops had not come. We call them again. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, we called about 2 hours ago to report an intruder, but no cops ever came. Are you still in the home? Did the intruders make it inside? Yes, we're inside. They didn't get in, but I'm scared that they're going to come back. The operator asked me for my address. I'm literally spelling out my address. The front door gets slammed, kicked again. I holler at the 911 operator. They're back. Please help. Hurry. Officers are on their way. Stay on the phone. Keep away from the windows and doors. Lisa is freaking out. I'm freaking out, wielding a golf club again. And suddenly, the entire front window, all 6x8, shatters to pieces. The glass is mostly contained by the black curtains. And I screamed the girliest, most blood-curdling scream I could imagine. I stood up and started swinging the golf club wildly, hoping to make contact with whatever or whoever was coming into the house. Moments later we hear sirens, and I could faintly see the blue lights swirling outside through the split in the curtains. A megaphone announces the police presence. They scour the area, and eventually knock on the door. Apparently, someone did try to kick down both doors, and there are boot prints to prove it. The window was shattered by a malt liquor bottle. They ended up finding a drunk dude from the trailer park nearby, who had been roaming the area. I bought a gun the next day. This happened very recently, only about 4 days ago, while I was camping with my best friend. We were both seniors in high school, and we were on a road trip for spring break. We live in Oregon, and drove down the coast to Northern California. We had a late start leaving our houses, and arrived at a little beach south of the Redwoods just after 9 p.m. It was pouring rain, and dark out, so we parked on a dirt road that had access to the beach, and decided against walking down the sand to set up camp. My friend drives a Toyota pickup with a camper shell covering the bed, which has a mattress in the back, so we decided to just sleep there. The beach area where we were was very secluded and belonged to a local Native American tribe that didn't mind visitors using the site, as long as they were respectful. After talking for a while in the shelter of the truck, my friend falls asleep. Before drifting off myself, I realized I had forgot to lock the passenger door of the truck. All of our valuables were stored in the cab, so I hoped nobody would come along and rob us in our sleep. After a dreamless few hours of sleep, I heard the sound of the driver's side door handle of my friend's truck begin to lift. The door happened to be locked. and I was awake at this point. Terrified whoever had been trying to open the door would go around to the unlocked side, or try to get into the bed, where they likely had no idea we were sleeping. It was still dark out at this time, but I heard footsteps start to walk around the back of the truck. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it through the back of the window of the camper shell, in hopes of alerting the intruder that people were in the vehicle. I heard footsteps get a little farther away. Then I heard the sound of sticks snapping and something heavy being thrown. Then the man let out a long, guttural yell. A few moments passed and more things were thrown, and more general yells mixed with the occasional F-bomb at the top of his lungs. It didn't take more than 2 or 3 yells before I woke up my friend. "Dude, there's a crazy man outside. He tried to get in the truck. Now he's walking around yelling," as I shook his shoulder. My friend sat upright and tried to peer out the window, but it was still pitch black out. I checked my phone, and it was 5 a.m. The sounds of the man walking around the woods near our truck didn't let up. Neither did the frequent yells and sounds of him throwing and smashing what I could only guess were logs or large rocks. Occasionally we would hear his yells from farther away, and we thought he was leaving, only to have him return yelling right by our truck only moments later. We sat huddled in fear for a good hour, unsure what to do. His shout sounded as though he was full of rage, but never attempted to get into the truck again. Eventually, the owners of the other car that was parked on the dirt road came up to the vehicle and drove off as the sky started to lighten. We didn't hear any more yelling or log throwing after that. We eventually were both able to fall back asleep for a few hours, waking up around 10 a.m. It was hard to believe that terrifying hour at the crack of dawn even happened, but both of us remember it too vividly to dispute. We still have no idea what the man was doing or why he sounded so angry. But to the guy screaming profanities in the dark by our truck, let's not meet.
So, I'm wondering if anyone has seen the people with unworldly large smiles or mouths. This has been with me for a while, and I just can't shake it, and I have to get it off my chest. I know it all sounds ridiculous, but here goes nothing. So a few years ago, I was outside in the backyard with a buddy of mine that was actually staying in my garage. We were cleaning an RV that I had just purchased when my wife came outside to moan about something. I can't remember what anymore, but when she was done, she went back into the house, me still in the RV, went to follow her to see what her problem was, and I hear my truck, which was right in front of the RV, start. Me not thinking about it, as I'm walking, I turn and look to see who's in my truck and see what at first I thought was my wife messing with me, but saw a female resembling my wife turn to look at me with this crazy, creepy large smile. And when I say large, I mean absolutely huge, with white teeth to boot, just looking at me. As I sort of back up and get to the back door and walk into the kitchen, I'm kind of back and forth in my head like, what was she doing? And then I get to the bedroom where my wife is standing, folding clothes. I'm not trying to freak her out, and myself, I turn and I haul butt back to the gate to see who was in my truck. When I do, there's nobody there. The key was in my pocket, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. My truck started, and my buddy outside even heard it start too, but didn't bother looking. I know what I saw, and I'm just wondering if anyone else has ever seen anything like this. So, all throughout my life, I've had weird encounters with, well, the unknown, but this one definitely takes the cake. Visiting my cousin for a night of video games in Yu-Gi-Oh! It was near 10 p.m. and I decided to smoke a cigarette. He joined me outside his back porch area to chat when, while he was talking to me, I felt compelled to look to the left, and that's when I don't know, felt something was moving over the ledge. It had a weird aura and presence about it. I know this sounds strange, but it was like it was ignoring me or didn't notice me because it continued to sort of move along the top of the ledge in a direction where eventually it would reach the opposite stairs and the path to the neighbor's north. But that's when it just stopped. It just stopped and turned itself directly facing me. I could immediately tell that it was looking at me, and I just sort of looked back. But being able to get a clear view of it now, it was a dark figure, but it had to have been at least 8 or 9 feet tall. I really don't know how long it was, but then suddenly my cousin said shakily, "Hey, oh my goodness, what is that? We need to get out of here." And as he opened the door to the house, my cousin is a big dude, by the way, and really isn't frightened by much. I kept looking at it, backing up, and until finally I shut the door. My cousin and I were in complete shock, but he went to grab his firearms, and we waited and turned the lights off, eventually going to bed with no other problems. To this day, I still don't know what that was. In other circumstances, were I alone, I would have thought that it was just a hallucination or my eyes playing tricks on me, but the fact that my cousin saw it too means that whatever it was actually there. And it was enough to scare us to the point where we felt like firearms were something that we needed to defend ourselves with. It was scary, and it's definitely something that I won't forget anytime soon. One day, when I lived in a house near the woods, around 10 a.m., I was sitting on my back porch deck. My dog was with me, as well as about 3 or 4 of my cats. I was home alone, and it was a quiet weekday, and my neighbors were gone to work. While I was sitting there quietly on the deck, all of my animals started looking around the yard, sort of panicked and startled, hiding and whatnot, like they had heard something coming. I sort of just sat there looking around and listening to see what they were reacting to. After several seconds, I started to hear what sounded like a humming sound. Then, it seemed like it was coming closer and sounded more like buzzing. By this time, my pets had ran and they hid and were nowhere to be found. The sound moved closer though and seemed to be sort of floating in the air, moving at about the same pace of a person walking quickly. The sound seemed to be steadily moving across my yard, hovering a few feet above my head. As it got closer, the humming and the buzzing became more distinct, and I could also hear voices. It sounded like a city of different voices, all talking at the same time. I heard it perfectly clear as it moved overhead past me, and the sound sort of faded as it went into my neighbor's backyard. Thankfully, it didn't pause or stop, and it took several minutes before my pets decided that it was safe enough to come back out from hiding. It was just a really weird experience, and if it hadn't have been for my pet's reaction, then I probably would have just thought that I was tripping or something. I felt a little uneasy after that too, and gathered my pets and went back inside. I haven't heard anything like that since or before that either. Thankfully, I didn't see anything attached to the voices. It was just a ball of traveling voices floating through the sky. Weird, I know. I've quibbled with the thought of publicly sharing my story for a while now. Recently, though, I've arrived at a place where I think the benefit of sharing outweighs the risk. People can be really judgmental. So I'm taking a chance and just putting it out there because, who knows, maybe it will help someone. So, many times I've looked back on the odd events leading up to the scariest night of my life, October 5th of 2015. I'd like to say that I did everything right, but honestly, in hindsight, I should have done more. I'm convinced that my son, who was 3.5 years old at that time, actually saved me from harm that night. I could have easily become another statistic in the crime database for sure. Although my stalker didn't hurt me physically, it took me months to get past the psychological damage for sure. So, with all this in mind, here's my story. In May of 2012, I temporarily exited the workforce following the birth of my son, Chris. He was born with a physical birth defect that would require multiple corrective surgeries during his first year of life. He was also born 2.5 months early, which had complicated things further, and ICUs are no fun. Chris's father, Aaron, agreed that I should stay home with our son until he was at least 1 year old, considering the circumstances. In May of 2013, I felt comfortable enough to leave my son with a babysitter, so I went job hunting. I ended up being hired on the spot as a waitress at a small but very popular chain restaurant in my little town. Let's just say, too, that this little diner is widely known for their waffles, and we'll leave it at that. I was hired on to work second shift, though, the newbie shift, because it's not as busy. After 2 months, I had worked my way up to the first shift. The breakfast shift is the moneymaker. By the summer of 2014, I had long built off a clientele of regular customers that enjoyed my service and tipped me well. Enough for me to have a little put back in savings, which came in handy when Aaron and I broke up. It was not an amicable split at first, but I digress. I ended up moving out of our apartment with Chris and renting a small 2-bedroom trailer in the same town. It was mid-November of 2014 when I first met Ryan, the man who would later stalk me. It was an abnormally slow Saturday morning shift at the diner. 2 men, one late 40s, early 50s, the other maybe early 20s, walked into the diner together and sat down in my section. They were my only 2 customers at the time, so when the older man of the 2 started making small talk, I had the time. The older man introduced himself to me as Ryan, and the younger man with him was his son. Right away, though, by his body language and tone, I could tell Ryan was being sort of flirtatious with me. He even cracked a cliche joke saying, "There's no way you work here because you're too pretty and you have all your teeth." Honestly, I really wasn't super amused with that tired kind of humor. I had heard it a million times over by then. And while Ryan was decent in the looks department, I'd even venture to say semi-attractive, I was a little annoyed with being casually hit on by him, if I'm being honest. I was 25 years old at the time, and much closer to his son's age. But nevertheless, I faked merriment because a happy customer equals a better tip. It's just part and parcel to the job, really. But suffice it to say, my fake laughing and smiling paid off, earning me a $10 tip on a $20 ticket. They were only there for 30 minutes too, which is not too bad, I thought to myself. The following weekend, Ryan came to the diner. This time, and every subsequent time thereafter, he came alone. There was nothing really unusual about this interaction, and from the last, I took his order, we sort of chit-chatted when I had time, I kept his coffee refilled, and that was it. But apparently he enjoyed his experience because, again, he left me a nice $12 tip on an $8 ticket. Ryan began visiting the diner every weekend from then on, up until the end of December. By then, he had started coming 2 to 3 times per week, and at this point, he really started showing an interest in getting to know me. Now, that's not something unusual per se, I get that. I had some other regulars that I actually developed friendships with, in fact, some even getting me Christmas gifts and such. So, I did tell him things about myself in casual conversation during his visits, just normal things that normal people talk about. One of the things I eventually told him about was the medical miracle that is my son. I even bragged about the fantastic job his doctors did, showing him the before and after photos of his surgeries. Over those past several weeks, Ryan's attitude toward me had changed. He was no longer this annoying, flirty, middle-aged guy, but rather a seemingly caring person. Maybe I was naive, but I genuinely appreciated his kindness, and I didn't interpret it as a romantic gesture at all. Ryan continued coming by on my shifts for breakfast 3 times a week, though, and in February of 2015 is when the first strange event occurred, which was soon followed by a string of more. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had picked Chris up from the babysitter and was heading home from work. Now, where I lived was on a small uphill dead-end road. As you pull onto my road from the main highway, you could see easily my trailer on the right side of the top of the hill. It was sort of positioned perpendicular to the road, and the back side of it is visible as you drive up the road. As I eased my way up the hill, something immediately caught my eye. I could clearly tell that my back door was open. I put the brakes on immediately and tried to figure out what to do. I mean, I literally never touched or unlocked that door, much less opened it, so I knew that something was off. A door is not going to unlock and open all by itself, so I ended up parking my car off to the side of the road and I called Aaron. At this point, we were on good terms and co-parenting our son really well. Aaron came straight over and checked out my trailer, while I remained back in my vehicle with Chris. About 5 minutes after entering, he called me and told me that it was all clear. Again, it's a small trailer. So I made my way up the hill, expecting to have been robbed or something, but in the end, nothing was missing. There was no damage to the door, so Aaron basically brushed things off, saying that I must have forgotten to close the door myself or something. But I knew better. But also, since there was no sign of a break and enter, I just let it go. 2 days later, on Thursday, I came home from work and the same thing. My back door is wide open. At this point, I know that I'm not crazy too. I know that I had locked that damn door. It didn't have a deadbolt, by the way, but it just sort of had a lock on the doorknob that you would turn. I'd even tested it out that morning before work to make sure that it was locked too, so I called Aaron again. I stayed parked with Chris on the side of the road while he did a quick pass through my trailer, and again, nothing out of the ordinary except my open back door. A quick inventory showed that nothing was missing again. I was nervous at this point, thinking that someone had broken in twice, and Aaron disagreed. He attributed this problem to a faulty doorknob lock, which made no sense to me. I mean, like I said, I had checked it. He then went to Lowe's and purchased a type of heavy-duty swivel lock to install on the door that locked from the inside of my home. He wanted to put my mind at ease, at least. So, while he installed the lock, I combed through the house. I literally spent hours after Aaron left inspecting every nook and cranny of my trailer. The outlets, my shower head, vents, my panty drawer, everything. I thought that maybe some freak had broken in and, planted secret cameras since they didn't take anything. But I didn't find anything amiss, so I just begrudgingly let it go. 2 days after that, so on Saturday afternoon, I'm off work heading uphill on the road toward my driveway. My son is spending the weekend with his dad, so I have the house to myself that evening. A wave of relief washes over me as I see that my back door is still closed. Now, I don't know why I decided to do this, but something compelled me to actually inspect the door up close. I needed to also make sure that it wasn't tampered with. And to my horror, I discovered that it had. There were pry marks along the edge of the door jamb. I immediately went inside and unlocked the door so that I could open it and inspect further. The edge of the door was bent like anything, and back on the inside where the doorknob met the jamb too. That damage wasn't there 2 days ago when Aaron installed that new lock. I knew that. I deduced that someone had probably been using the credit card trick or something similar to easily break into that door, since the way it was locked was by the knob. And when they figured out that that would no longer work, they tried to pry it open, not knowing that a new lock was on the other side of the door. I was thankful that the lock held, and at this point I called the police and made a report. They basically told me that there wasn't really much that they could do in this instance other than document the incident. They told me to call them if anything else happened. Needless to say, that wasn't very satisfactory to me, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping at home that night though, so I ended up making the hour drive to my parents' house and crashing there. Now, nothing else really happened for a little while after that. By March, I had been able to put February's events behind me and feel secure in my home again. I was working and going about life as usual. At this point, Ryan had begun visiting the diner 5 days a week. Oddly enough, he was there each shift that I worked, too. It became a bit of a running joke with the other waitresses, and in fun they teased me about having a stalker. I would soon find out just how true that actually was, though, because in April, things got really weird. You see, I came home from work one day to find my grass had been mowed. Now, I usually pay a neighbour to do it for me since I didn't have a lawnmower. My yard was really small, but maintaining it was a requirement of my lease agreement. My neighbour didn't charge much to mow it, and he needed the extra cash anyway, so it was a real win-win. I knew that I hadn't asked my neighbour to mow recently, so I thought that was strange. I asked him if he went ahead and decided to do it anyway, and he said that he hadn't. So then I called my landlord and asked her if she had mowed my grass for some reason. The lease said if it reaches a certain height, then she would mow it and charge me for it. I knew my grass hadn't been high enough to warrant that, though, but it was the only plausible explanation. Of course, she said no, she hadn't mowed my grass, and I was just completely stumped. I then assumed that an anonymous neighbour must have mowed my grass out of the goodness of their heart, like a pay-it-forward kind of thing. I mean, what else was I to think? All throughout April and the beginning of May, my grass was also being anonymously mowed once per week. I know it probably sounds strange hearing this, but at the time I genuinely thought that a neighbour was just doing neighbourly things and didn't want to be recognised for it. Now, on May 5th of 2015, Aaron and I decided to take Chris to the zoo. When we get back from the zoo late that afternoon, we discovered that my front door was cracked open, which was really annoying. But my front door did have a deadbolt, but I must have forgotten to lock it, which was really stupid of me, I admit. You can imagine how upset I was due to my back door being tampered with multiple times back in February too. I just didn't understand why this was happening again. Like all the other times, nothing was taken. My belongings seemed untouched. Yes, I was feeling targeted, but I didn't call the police because I felt like I technically had nothing to report again. There was nothing stolen or vandalized, just an open front door. So I just let it go again. 2 days later, though, I would discover the depth of things. May 7th, 2015. It was one of my rare days off. I was at home relaxing when the diner called me. I answered thinking maybe my boss wanted me to come into work. It wasn't my boss, but my coworker, Celia. She stated that someone named Mary called the diner asking to speak to me. Mary had apparently asked for me by name. Since I wasn't at work that day, Mary left her phone number and requested that I call her as soon as possible. I thanked Celia for relaying the message and ended the call, sort of perplexed. I didn't know who Mary was, but out of curiosity, I gave her a call. Mary ended up being Ryan's estranged wife. I didn't even know that he was married. She informed me that Ryan had a nervous breakdown while they were arguing earlier. He started raving like a wild man about how my name is a better girlfriend than she is a wife. He told her that we were in love and that he had been taking care of me and my Down syndrome son for months. My son doesn't even have Down syndrome, by the way. My son is not mentally impaired. She initially thought that it was all just crazy talk, considering his mental state. He mentioned where I worked, though. He said that we were going to get married. He said that I had asked him to adopt my son. He said that he was going to run away with me in order to get away from her. He even told her that he had started visiting after following me home one day. And when he said that, Mary knew that something was very wrong. Ryan had somewhat of a history with mental issues, and Mary was used to him weaponizing things to hurt her feelings during arguments, even if those things are lies. But she said this time was different. She knew that he had started frequenting the diner, and red flags went way up for her when he admitted to following someone home. So she decided to call the diner to see if anyone by my name worked there. When Celia confirmed this, Mary perceived the possible danger, and she left me her name and number, requesting a call back. Obviously, my head was spinning at this point. While things were finally starting to make sense, I was still gobsmacked. At one point in the conversation, Mary mentioned my grass being mowed. Yeah, Ryan even flaunted the yard work that he did for me in her face. It was all very strange and very surreal. Basically, Ryan had been obsessing over me for months. He became delusional and had created a whole relationship between me and him in his mind, and it was all just in his head. And obviously, he was the one that was breaking into my home when I was gone. The visits, as he said. Why he did it? I still haven't pieced that 100% together. Because, he never took anything. I imagine that he was mowing my grass because that was his little way of taking care of me. Anyway, by the end of the call, I decided to go to the police department in person to file a report about Ryan. I thought at the very least that this is harassment and I needed to document it. Maybe I could get a restraining order after all. Mary offered to provide an official statement to the police as well, to which I thanked her. The PD took our statements and the harassment complaint was filed, although I couldn't get a restraining order based off my statement alone. I had no proof after all. The officer did assure me that he would personally go and talk to Ryan. I then went straight to the diner to inform my boss, Chase, of the situation. Now, Chase took this very seriously. Just that morning, a third shift waitress actually brought up to Chase how a man came into the diner very early, around 4 a.m., and this man was trying to get her to tell him which days that I'd be working that week. She told Chase that it made her uncomfortable, so when I told Chase about Ryan, he went back and looked at the cameras from that morning. And sure enough, the man that was bothering third shift for info about me was Ryan. So Chase initiated the process through corporate to get a permanent ban on Ryan from the diner. It was approved at a later date. Now, I was scheduled to work the following day, and obviously I was nervous throughout my entire shift. But thankfully, Ryan didn't show up. Nor did he show up the following day, or the next day after that. All was quiet at home as well. The officer showing up at Ryan's house to speak with him must have spooked him enough to stop. Weeks, then months went by, no Ryan in sight. No vandalism at my home, no mysteriously mown grass, nothing. My life had gone completely back to normal. But things changed again in October. October 5th of 2015. It was around 8 p.m. My son Chris fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie. I had dozed off as well until I heard a very light knock at my front door. I then walked to the kitchen and look out the only window that faces my driveway. There's no cars there except for my own. So I figured that the light tapping that I heard at my door was either just the TV or my half-asleep brain playing tricks on me. I then returned to the couch and started playing a game on my phone. About 5 minutes later, though, I heard a few light knocks on my door again. This time, I was wide awake, so I knew my brain wasn't playing tricks. So I walked back over to my kitchen window to double-check the driveway to see who was there. Again, my car was the only one in my driveway. And right as I go to close the kitchen window blinds, loud knocking suddenly erupts at my front door. And I mean loud, angry banging. I guess my instincts kicked in and I sprinted to the couch, scooped Chris up into my arms and ran down the hallway to his bedroom. I did the only thing that I could think of in that fraction of a moment. He was groggy and confused, but he listened to my instructions. Get under your bed, stay under your bed, and don't come out until I tell you to. I then ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife while dialing 911. I actually screamed at the door that I was calling the cops in the hopes that it would scare whoever this was away. I positioned myself at the end of the hallway which connects my son's room to the living room. This way I'd have a clear view of both the front door, in front of me, and my son's bedroom doorway behind me. As the operator picked up my call, the banging on my front door was getting even louder. 911 said that she was dispatching police right away. She instructed me to stay on the line until they arrived. About 12 minutes into the call, the banging got even more violent, rattling pictures off the wall. I thought for sure, too, that they were about to break my door down at any moment. 911 asks me where I was located in the home, and I told her. She asked me if I could hide somewhere. She told me not to put myself in danger. And in that tiny moment, I felt enraged. Heck no, I'm not going to hide. I'm not taking my eyes off my son's bedroom under any circumstances. Where are the cops? I said. And besides, I lived in a small trailer, and the only hiding place for an adult is like in my bedroom closet. I'd easily be found, so I just erupted over the phone. Look, lady, I'm a single mum. I have no man, no gun, and no place to hide. If he breaks this door down, what am I supposed to do? Throw this knife at him? Where are the cops? She assured me again that the cops were on their way and to stay on the line. More banging, but this time it moved to the actual side of the trailer. It sounded like they were taking a baseball bat and beating against the outside of the trailer. At that moment, Chris started shrieking. I ran the few steps over to his room to check on him. The loud commotion had just pushed his fear gauge over the edge. He was screaming, crying incessantly under his bed. I quickly ascertained that he was physically okay, and I returned back to the end of the hallway to check on the front door. As I was explaining to 911 that my son was okay, just scared, I noticed that the banging had suddenly stopped. I waited another minute or so, trying to listen out for any sign of further escalation, like window breaking or something, but all I could hear was sobs coming from my son's room. All in all, it took the cops a whopping 23 minutes to arrive. By then, the perp was long gone. For reference, I live about 10 minutes away from the police station too. 911 even called it an active home invasion. I was livid about the response time, to say the least. My front door was made out of some type of metal, just a cheap generic trailer door, and it was now completely covered in dents. There were noticeable scratch marks on the lock, failed attempt at the picking of the deadbolt. The siding on the trailer was damaged where the perp had hit it with something, and given the history, I immediately suspected Ryan was the perp. The police said since I didn't actually see the person, then they couldn't arrest him without an eyewitness. The most they could do was make a report. They did end up canvassing the immediate area in case he was on foot, since I didn't see a vehicle in my driveway prior to this happening. However, there was no sign of him or anyone around and about. I deduced that he probably had parked nearby out of sight, that way his vehicle wouldn't be spotted or recognized at my home. My home was situated next to a thin patch of woods and has public access roads on the other side. I also am absolutely convinced that Ryan had nefarious plans for me that evening, but when he discovered my son was at home with me, via his terrified shrieking, he bailed. He stopped trying to break into my home the moment that my son inadvertently made his presence known. For whatever reason, Ryan always lit up when I talked about my son. He used to initiate conversations about Chris just to watch me dote over him. Looking back, I guess it was his morbid way of bonding with my kids, and I think in his own sort of warped way, he grew to care about him. So when he heard Chris's scream, he decided to not follow through with whatever his plan was for me. I ended up taking a few days off work because I was so shaken up after that. I stayed at my parents' house during that time because I was afraid to go home. My landlord had the damaged door replaced while I was gone. Realizing that I had a job and a life and that I couldn't stay gone forever, I knew that I had to go home. So I got a gun, a small caliber revolver, but it would do the job. And then I went home. I lived in that trailer for another 4 months before I saved up enough money to move. It was totally peaceful during those months, with no further events or altercations, but I just couldn't stand being there anymore. Since then, I've changed jobs, met someone special, gotten engaged, bought a house, and even got a dog. No further sign of Ryan anywhere during any of these life changes, and it's been nearly 7 years since any sign of him. Ryan seems to have disappeared out of my life in the same manner that he first appeared, just out of nowhere. And I couldn't be happier that he's gone. Hopefully, it stays that way.
Back in 2001, my parents bought a property to build my childhood home on the south side of Chicago. Some backstory on the property that we only found out after the house was built was that the marsh or the swamp on the property used to be a dumping ground for the bodies from the Italian mafia in Chicago. The black tar that was in the swamp made it impossible to get out of, and the bodies just disappeared. Fast forward to when my family lived there, We had a beautiful 3-bedroom house with a wonderful yard, swing in the backyard, and even a basement that my parents let us write our names all over. It was a huge highlight of our house as kids. And in that basement, we also had a laundry room that was around the corner of the stairs, and some ballet mirrors leading to it. Ever since I was a kid, I dreaded having to go down to that basement and always felt like someone was watching me. It was never just a kid being scared of the basement ordeal, too. Something truly felt off. One day I was walking down the stairs of the basement, and out of the corner of my eye, looking through the mirror, a man was stood there, staring directly at me. He was tall with a flat cap and a scrappy beard, plain as day. I tried to scream, but it felt like all the air was just gone, just like in a dream. He started coming towards the stairs, and quickly as I could, I sprinted up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. As a child, I was a wonderfully perpetual liar and knew no one would actually believe me, so I never said a word. A few weeks went by, and I tried to put the image of the man that I saw out of my head, but after that, it just never felt safe in the house. The scariest instance, though, was when I was grabbing something out of my parents' room and again felt someone staring at me. But for fear of seeing the man again, I began to run out of the room. The only thing, though, was that I couldn't actually move. I stood there just like a statue, unable to do anything except cry. I felt a pressure on my chest, like someone was holding me back from moving forward. After what felt like forever of being frozen, I finally was able to let out a small cry, and my mother ran into the room and grabbed me. Strangely, too, she had to yank me so hard out of that spot as if I was sort of like a mouse stuck in a sticky trap. As we fled the room, the door slammed behind us, and my mum took me outside where I felt like I was finally able to breathe. After that, we never really talked about that moment. And apart from my own traumatizing encounter, my younger sister also seemed to be on edge in this house. She could never sleep alone and would frequently scream in the night. This will come into play later. Another thing to know too is that around the house, things would move locations. Doors would open randomly, and we all left the house, and it was in disarray when we returned, as if someone was partying there. My parents never said a word to us about anything that happened and carried on cleaning as if it was normal. Given that my 3 sisters and I were from ages 9 to 5 at that time, so I'm sure nothing was going to be discussed anyway. Things kept happening over the years though, and I would frequently see the man staring through the windows as we came back into the house, around corners, and even sitting on a chair in our living room once. Eventually though, we had to move due to my parents losing our house in the recession, but I never forgot about that house. After we got older though, we all were having dinner one night and were reminiscing the old house. I brought up that moment where I was stuck in the bedroom, and my mum's face turned white as she told me that she saw a tall man with a flat cap and scrappy beard holding me there, and didn't want to frighten me at the time. As she described the man, I saw everyone's face drop because apparently we'd all had encounters with this guy. My older sister would see him as she played dolls in the basement, my dad in his garage once, my mum with me, but the scariest story was from my younger sister. When she was a child, the man would visit the edge of her bed and stare directly over her, telling her to get out, and if you don't go, I'm going to kill your family. You're all going to die. I'll kill you. Her screams every night were not from childhood nightmares, but an actual nightmare that we all seemed to be living in. She would wake up with scratches from the man that we just assumed were from her childhood eczema, but no, apparently he actually touched her. To this day, we never bring up that old house or drive past the street where it sits. It still terrifies me to today to think about all of the experiences in the house, and I'll never, ever go back there. While it will always be the home that I grew up in, I truly consider it to be a place in hell. So, this encounter happened this afternoon. I'm still very shaken about all of this and cannot get it out of my mind, so bear with me. My day started as it normally does. Early morning work shift, come home, drive my partner to work, come home to nap. However, when I got home, my partner texted me saying to pick them back up because apparently they just got news that they were laid off for the winter due to a very slow season. I went back, came back and went for my nap while my partner went to play video games. I was in a pretty deep sleep with my favorite TV show playing as background that I've seen a million times. About 2 hours or so later, I'm woken up to my creaky front door being opened, followed by a deep and unfamiliar hello. I listened intently as I thought that it could be my partner's friend who often stops by. I didn't hear anything further, so I shrugged it off to my TV and tried to go back to sleep. Shortly after that, I hear my partner open their bedroom door. I hear them yell, "Who the heck are you and why are you in my house?" I panic as I don't know who they're talking to, but I listen to the short interaction. And an older man, very startled by my partner's presence, explains that he had watched a package be delivered and after no one came to get the package right away, he decided to come inside. The package was still on the porch afterward, by the way. My partner tells this stranger, who had been walking directly towards my bedroom, to leave and that they were calling the police. But the man sort of lingers, stalling my partner, and asks if he can use our bathroom. He says, "No, get out," and the man slowly makes his way out and drives away. We called the police immediately after he left, giving him his and his vehicle's description. I called my neighbor to let them know and keep an eye out, and he informed me that when he came home 2 to 3 hours earlier, that vehicle was parked at the end of our street, and when he drove by, the man actually covered his face. I can't stop thinking that this man knows my schedule and has targeted me for some reason, but I'm so lucky that today of all days, I was not home alone. When I was little, maybe around 4 years old, I lived in Okinawa, Japan with my Japanese mother and my American father, who at that time was stationed at one of the military bases on the island. We lived off base in a house and things were pretty great. But before I get to the story, let me give you a little bit of background information about my family. So, before I was born, my mother was dealing with the Yakuza for some time and she ended up owing them money for some reason. She managed to get out of that situation without paying them when she got with my Marine father, and the Yakuza would never hurt an American. So my mother knew that she was safe as long as she was with him and on the military base. Now, I have no idea why we lived off base at that time when I was born, but we did. And one evening, I was in my room upstairs playing when my mother comes in, frantically shutting the door behind her, locking it and turning off the lights. She tells me to be quiet, and when I ask her what the matter was, she just scoots next to me and I can silently hear her crying. My father was at work, I believe, at the time of the incident was happening. My mother and I heard the front door slam, and then we heard footsteps walking up the stairs. We see the silhouette of the person walking the hallway from the light peeking from underneath my bedroom door. My mother, who is panicking like crazy now and praying in her mother tongue, gets a hanger to use as a weapon. At this point, I am crying like crazy too. The doorknob starts to jiggle and it goes on for some time until all of a sudden it just stops. We believe that they're gone, but we didn't dare leave until the police came, and that's all I really remember from that time. As an adult now, 23, it took me years to put the story together. My mum still denies it like she does when I ask her about the certain parts of her past that she doesn't want to talk about. My dad doesn't even bother to answer the question and just disregards it. But I know what happened, even if it wasn't the Yakuza. someone other than my father came into the house and they tried to get into my room. But thankfully, they didn't. So I was visiting my partner, his name is Leo, at his home in a rural part of my state, about a 45-minute drive away from the college town that I'd lived in at the time. There were snow or ice advisories in place for early the next morning, and I figured that I should head back before these conditions hit. It was probably about 10ish p.m., really dark out that night, and I started on my way back home. The road seemed fine to me for the most part. A bit icy, but nothing my little two-wheel drive couldn't really handle. About 5 minutes out from Leo's house, I was on a very quiet two-lane, two-way, sort of hilly road with scarce lighting. Nothing inherently creepy about that, as I'd been up and down it countless times before. And well, I happened to be on the phone with Leo when I stumbled across a completely flipped car in the other lane, partially blocking my path. I was in shock and couldn't properly communicate this discovery to Leo, who was probably growing confused and concerned. Trying to be a good Samaritan, though, I almost immediately leapt out of my car, telling Leo hurriedly that I needed to investigate. I stayed on the phone, or so I thought. He could actually no longer hear me, and vice versa, as the call was connected to my car's Bluetooth pairing system. But as I approached the flipped car, scanning the scene for any crash victims, a man, old white guy, raggedy appearance, around maybe 60 years old, stumbled out from behind the vehicle. I rushed over, asked him, "Are you okay?" and began insisting on calling an ambulance, police, or anyone who could help the situation. I was a couple of feet away from him and kept an eye on the car, half expecting to glean any details of the incident and spot other potential wounded passengers. But I couldn't make anything out in the dark, and the window tints didn't help either. The man became panicked, though, and told me repeatedly and frantically, "Please don't call 911, don't do it, it's under control," and added feebly that a friend of his would be there soon to help. My spidey senses started to kick in at this point. He appeared completely unscathed too, while the car was certainly totaled and flipped upside down even, and he seemed unusually composed too, right up until I mentioned calling for help, that is. At this point, I imagine Leo was frantic on the phone, and I now realize the call is connected to my car speakers. I begin to sort of back away from the old dude, still totally shaken by what I'm seeing, and toward my parked car, still running. I'm probably 20 feet away from it now. As I'm backing out, the guy starts walking toward me and saying stuff that I couldn't really make out. And finally, I decided to just wish him luck, and I picked up my pace, not turning my back on him, till I got to my car and was able to drive off. I mean, I really had no way of defending myself, and the situation turned very sketchy very quickly. But the worst part, though, was that as I drove past, I noticed another parked car just a few lengths behind the wrecked one. To this day, I have regrets about the whole thing. I definitely should have just called 911. There was no legitimate reason not to, but who was this guy? Was he just in shock? Was he even in a crash? Was it even his car, or was he the owner of the other one nearby? Why did he insist on not receiving help from emergency services? I don't know what was going on that night, but there was something sketchy about it, for sure. So one night, while preparing for a camping party that I was going to throw as a teenager, it was pre-twilight, so like 7 or 8 p.m. during the summer, I had sent my two friends to collect buds and booze for said party while I tended the fire and collected wood. It was a nice secluded spot up a massive hill, but like 3/4 of a mile hike on foot. A place that I'm normally most comfortable and know pretty well because I grew up here. I know of bears, coyotes, and once I saw a mountain lion on our property, but what I heard when my friends left shortly after really didn't sound like any of those things. It started after 15 minutes when my friends left. First, the rustling in the leaves and branches out in the edge of the woods, but far enough away from the fire that I couldn't see it. It definitely got closer though, and I could tell that it was pretty big. We do have horses, and they do graze up on the campsite every now and then, and I know how they sound trudging through, but this wasn't a time that they were up in that pasture or camping spot. Whatever it was, it got closer, like it was checking out the smoke, but far enough out in the woods to where I couldn't see it, but I could definitely hear that it was there. And then it made a sound. It was a hoot type sound. It came right from where I could tell that it was, like it was hooting at me, loud and low. It sort of sounded like growling at the same time too. It's really hard to explain, but I put my back to the fire, chilled to the bone when I heard it. It was unlike anything I've ever heard, and I've looked for sounds like it since, but have never found anything like it. In any case, I kept watching the direction the sound came from with just a machete that I brought for kindling chopping. Cursing myself now for not bringing a rifle for protection. It felt like hours of the hooting sounds and this growling and the pacing back and forth, scaring me half to death, and I'm not one to be afraid out in the dark on that campsite normally, but I just wanted my friends to return at this point. I didn't want to leave the safety of the warm light, and it was in reality just 1 hour, but eventually I saw the lights from my friend's truck crest the hill, and as soon as I saw them, I sprinted towards them as I heard the leaves rustle in the woods again. I guess it took off, but it scared me enough to now always carry a gun with me at all times on my property, because that wasn't anything that I normally would hear, and the only way I know how to describe it was that it was big, curious, and hooted sort of extremely low, almost like a growl, but nothing like a normal owl or coyote or anything like that. So, I was 29 living with a friend, and we got to tending the fire through various times of the night to stay warm during the winter. It was 2 a.m. in mid-January. The 2 dogs would always join you on the fire run to go potty and get some sniffs in. From the woodpile to the fire, I'd say is probably 40 meters, maybe more, but I'm bad at math, but not much more. I go outside to tend the chore of keeping the fire furnace going. The dogs go out the door, but for some reason that night, they never left the porch. I didn't notice until I got to the woodpile that they weren't keeping pace like usual. And then the hiss happened. It sounded just like nails on a tarp or something, like a raspiness but guttural. A hiss mixed with a growl for sure. I froze for a second, realizing that the dogs were up at the porch still, not having anything to do with leaving it. So I was kind of screwed if whatever made the hiss decided that it was going to do what it was going to do. It had to be close because it was really loud, like it was on the other side of the woodpile. I only had a small load in my arms already when I heard it, so I backed up the drive towards the porch where the dogs were still and asking to go back inside. Like they were scared, and so I bailed on filling the furnace, and I just took the dog's advice to get inside while I could. I woke my friend up and told him to get a flashlight and help me with the stove because I wasn't going to go back out without him and a flashlight. When we did, there wasn't really anything that we could see, and this time the dogs were all about helping to check out the area too. I'll always trust dogs when they act scared like that, but I looked for tracks the next morning, but it didn't help. The whole area of snow was packed down around our woodpile too and driveway, so I never really got any answers, just more fear of upstate New York, I guess. But let me just reiterate that whatever this thing was, it definitely wasn't from this area. It was also big, so it wasn't like a snake or something. It was way bigger than that. In any case, all I can hope for is that whatever it was is gone. I was visiting my grandmother's house up in the cold northern Norway. I've always had weird feelings while staying there. Always felt like I was being watched at all times. Just a constant feeling of unease, I guess. Especially on the second floor where me and my little sister were staying. Upstairs is 2 rooms, and I slept in the closest room to the staircase, and my sister had the adjacent room. The house is fairly old and is rather noisy, often getting woken up at night by my sister walking past my room to go to the bathroom, which is downstairs. My grandmother has struggled for a long time with her sleep too. She always wakes up at like 3 in the morning every night. She has claimed that there is activity around the house, the classic sort of doors opening and closing, sounds of footsteps, and the feeling that you're not alone. Anyway, it was around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I just couldn't sleep that night. I was basically just rolling around in my bed and ended up laying in my bed staring at the wall. The room started to feel much colder than usual, and something that happened next still gives me chills to this day. I heard a loud, raspy breath right behind me, like someone was laying in the bed right behind me, breathing heavily. It sounded like someone who was really sick, sort of struggling to breathe, I think. I even felt air brush over the back of my neck, and I completely froze. I was terrified. The breathing lasted for several seconds too, but man, it felt like a lot longer than that. I started to count to 5 before I would turn around to see if anything was behind me, and when I did, there was nothing. The room was left in an eerie silence. My heart was pounding so fast and hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of my throat, and I was staring at the door almost like expecting it to open, and it did. While staring at the door, I see the door handle go down slowly and the door creaking open. It's hard for me to explain what I felt at that moment, but it was overwhelming, and I managed to leap out of the bed and move out into the hallway to try and find any explanation of what happened. But I saw nothing and heard nothing. The windows were all closed too, so I just really couldn't find an explanation for how it happened. And man, it felt like I sat in that bed for days that night. But it was only a few hours before dawn, and when morning finally arrived, I went downstairs and sat myself down in the living room. My sister and grandmother were in the kitchen, and I overheard my sister telling my grandmother something. That around 2 or 3 in the morning, she was woken up by a loud raspy breathing in her room too. When I overheard that, it gave me instant chills to the bones and made me super terrified to be in that house. Me and my sister, we used to visit my grandmother every year, but it's been a long time now since I managed to get myself to visit my grandmother again after that. This event happened when I was 16 years old, and I'm actually 24 now. And I just, for the life of me, can't make myself go back there just yet. I am planning to go there next year. My grandmother is having a hard time lately, so hopefully I can visit her before it's too late, I guess, but maybe I'll get new experiences to share with you guys if I do go back there. Not that I want them again. Anyway, thanks for listening to my experience. It's something that I'll never forget, and I just felt like sharing it with everyone here. I hope my English wasn't too bad, but since it's not my first language, I struggle a bit. Anyway, like I said, thanks for listening, and if I do go back there, I'll be sure to send you guys the stories if anything happens, that is. I'm 41 and male, and in my early childhood, my family and I lived in an old 2-story farmhouse in rural Illinois. The first time that I saw it too, I remember getting up early to watch Saturday morning cartoons. As I started down the stairs, a dark silhouette that was vaguely man-shaped passed by the bottom of the stairs. It had the look of sort of oily, blackish grey smoke. I know that sounds weird, but that's the best way that I can describe it. No eyes or features, just the loose shape of a man. Frightened, I ran back to my room and hid under the covers until I fell back asleep. When I woke up, I tried going downstairs again, but this time it was on the stairs coming up. Again, I ran and hid in my bed, but this time it followed me into my room. I remember that to look at it, it was a bit like being drawn into it, and just froze in fear. I must have passed out or something because I don't remember what happened after that, and I got a good look at it too. It definitely was not a pleasant experience, and I would not recommend. Now, I can't imagine not having told my parents about the black ghost, but they just must not have believed me, because at no point in any of this did any adult do anything about it or even acknowledge it. Because years later, when I was in my 30s, I asked my mum if she remembered me talking about it, and she didn't. It went from that first encounter when I was maybe 5 or 6, up until we moved out of that house when I was 9 as well. I do wonder how someone could miss the fact that their kid is spooked the heck out all the time. And I mean, for years, if I was out in the yard playing by myself, there was a good chance the shadow was going to mess me up that day. It would just be behind me all of a sudden. If I turned around and looked behind me, it would be there. It would not often wander into my field of vision, and I had to look at it. It did things to get my attention even, like throwing sand or making noise. Sometimes it even spoke, but not like with a voice. I just kind of knew what it was saying. It's hard to explain, but I would speak to it when I knew it was behind me. I stopped doing that when I asked who it was, because the shadow told me that it was me. I didn't like that at the time. All but once these incidents happened in broad daylight. Once I was looking at the window and saw it come out of the barn at night. Only on one occasion did it appear at night, and that was when I was looking at the window and saw it coming out of the barn. Thankfully, all the shadow incidences stopped when we moved from that house. But I sometimes consider going back and trying to make contact again, just to see what the heck it wanted.